Well, hello and welcome. When I moved my workshop from Virginia to Washington State, I sold my Unisaw, and my Unisaw had a big accessory table and it had my router table built in. So I lost my router table, and so today I'm going to show you how I'm going to install a new router table on my SawStop accessory table. Now, the type of table I used in Virginia was simply an insert that I got from Lee Valley, and it's, for those who are interested, it's number 05J2501. And it's just a plastic insert that mounts on top of a router base, and then you cut a hole in the table with a little rabbet on it, and this just fits down in there, and bingo, there you are. You can use your fence, your rip fence for your table saw, and that becomes your guide for doing the router table work. So this kit comes with the base, which is this plastic type of base. It comes with a template that you can cut out so that you can cut all your holes and so forth in the proper positions. Comes with a little rubber stopper that prevents the whole unit from rotating inside the table. It comes with a 1/2-inch countersink bit for countersinking your attachment holes into this plastic. It comes with a little aluminum trammel piece to cut out the circle for the hole that this fits into, and a little alignment washer for when you're doing your initial setup. Comes with a set of directions, and it finally comes with a little guide bushing kind of a thing, 1/4 inch on one end, 1/2 inch on the other, and a little 3/16 I think it is, pin that sticks up. And this you use while you're doing the setup, and then later on you can use it as a guidepost for your router table if you ever need to do that. What it does not come with is the router and the base. So you got to buy that separately, and I bought a second base for my Bosch router here just for this purpose. On this base I have a exhaust duct here for hooking up a vacuum cleaner, because the hole here is fairly large, and for a lot of cuts I can actually pull the chips down through the vacuum cleaner and keep the router table clean. It also does not come with this optional bushing, which you know, I don't use very much, but I have it from my last setup. It fits right into the router base here, screws onto the bottom, and if you're using a small bit, it gives you a little more table support if you're doing some small work. Like I say, mostly I do work that's larger and I don't need that, and so I don't use it, and that allows my vacuum to pick up more of the dust because it's a bigger hole. Okay, so I'm going to go through the process of installing this. A couple of things I want to point out before we get down to business is on my table here I've used tape to mark where the underneath grid work, the supporting grid work, it's 3/4 inch stock, where that is. So this opening here I know is clear, and I can drill a big, you know, cut a big hole in there. Also, from my past experience, when I hooked this thing up in Virginia, I wasn't really thinking about the dust collection aspect, and I actually installed where this outlet would be right next to one of these underneath girders. So today, what I'm doing is I'm really thinking that through, and I'm going to mount this so that the exhaust port here runs on the diagonal of this rectangle, and that way I got lots of room for the hose to come up, make its bend, and connect. And it also gives me access to the switch where you have to reach underneath to actually flip the switch. So the other thing I've thought about is that this table has got, you know, a plastic coating on it that I don't want to chip. So I went ahead and put tape around the outline of where this hole is going to be cut so that I'll have less chance of chip out. And that also gave me the opportunity to draw the line where this would be so that I make sure I don't, get into the area where the actual underneath supports are. And so I should be able to just drill my first pilot hole right in the very center and align everything to that and do my cuts. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is mount the base plate, the plastic plate, onto the router base. And to do that, we got to mark some holes on this clear plastic template. Now, this clear plastic template, the directions told me to separate from the clear plastic directions, which I did, and then I mounted the clear plastic directions on a piece of white paper so I could read them. And so the first thing to do is to take this template and lay it onto the router base with this centering bushing I was telling you about installed into the collet. And you're going to cut a couple of little slots in the side of this plastic so that when you slide this thing on, you got a place to tape it in place so it doesn't move around. So I went ahead and did that in 2 places. And I'm just going to go ahead and tape that thing in place while we get ready to mark some holes. Now what we're going to do here is mark the holes that have to be drilled into that plastic base in order to mount this router onto it. Now from the last time I'd done this, I knew which 3 holes I had used, and I had 3 screws. So before you start, make sure you got the screws, which you got to supply yourself, and that you know what holes you're going to use. Okay, so now I think you can see what I'm talking about. I've got 3 holes in the aluminum base for the router that I'm going to use to screw these countersunk screws into. And this little circle template thing they give you, it's hard to see there. See, it's about a bunch of little circles with X's drawn in it. And the idea is you pick a circle that's about the size of the screw hole you're dealing with, lay it on there so they can really try to get this X centered as good as you can in the hole. It's not cooperating that well with me. And then you take, they say to use a sharp pin. I'm just going to use an awl, put it on the center of that X. Try to get right on the center. And just try to leave a mark, which I did. I got a nice little mark there. Now, to tell you the honest truth, I don't know that using this little thing really helps. I think I'm just going to eyeball the holes myself because I can see where they are. There we go. Okay, next step, we're going to transfer this onto that flat plastic plate and mark the holes on the plastic plate. Okay, now I'm going to take the template, the plastic template, and I've taken this plastic base and I've laid it on a couple of pieces of 2x4 on end with a little block underneath. The idea being that if I lay this right on top of the block, I can put this little guide pin thing in and make it about as vertical as I can see. And then all I got to do is take this plastic thing and keeping it the same right side up as I had before. Put her down on top of that. Put those 2 pieces of tape there, and now theoretically, these holes that I marked ought to be in the same position as they need to be to fit on top of the router. So I'm going to take the same little awl, look for the center of the holes I marked, make a little mark, all right, and they look pretty good. All right, so the next step is going to be to take this countersink here and drill into the plastic the right depth so I can make my screw holes. Okay, now I've taken the router and put the base plate on it. And now the last thing we got to do to the base plate here is to mark some holes that the alignment pin, they've got this little rubber bushing alignment pin that you'll see later on keeps this whole thing from rotating inside the router table top. So we got to drill holes to be able to attach that. And so that's what they give you this little trammel for. And basically I put the big alignment pin in the center of the chuck and put this little trammel on top of there. And then I'm going to clamp this on so it doesn't go anywhere while I'm drilling holes. So I just got to line up my C-clamp here with the bottom of my router base. There, that's on pretty good. Now I'm using a 3/16 inch drill. I'm just going to drill straight on through the plastic base there. Also, by the way, these holes are also probably a bigger purpose of them is they're the holes that we use to align when we're cutting out the circle in the table itself. So they got dual purpose. Just take off the clamp and the trammel. You can see we got our, I think you can see there, we got our holes drilled in there. There we go. And now that we're done with the base of the router, it's time to work on the table itself. Now the instructions think that you're building a router table from scratch, where you have just a piece of wood that you're going to be able to flip over upside down and everything else. Well, we don't have that. We have an installed table. So the instructions have you basically starting from the underneath part of the table. Well, that's kind of tough for us. So we're going to do everything from the top part, and I'll show you how that works. First thing I got to do is get a 1/2 inch hole drilled right in the center here, and that's what we're going to use as a guide for running the router around to route out the rabbet first, and then route out this centerpiece all together. So I've got a 1/2 inch drill chucked up here. I've already marked the center of where the hole's got to be. And let's just go ahead and drill it, try to keep it as straight as we can. So now that I have the 1/2 inch hole location marked, I'm going to use this little guide block I made. It's just a piece of cherry that I drilled a 1/2 inch hole in, nice and perpendicular. Fits around the bit. And all I got to do is take the bit, center it there, hold this block down hard, and I ought to get a perpendicular hole. There we go. Now I got my guide hole. Next step, do some routing. Now, in order to route out this rabbet and then route out that center part of the table, I have to be able to pivot this base on those 2 holes I just cut. And so that's where this guide comes in handy. It's got a 3/16 inch tip on it. So what I did was I took a piece of scrap 2 by 2, and drilled a hole 3/4 of an inch deep, 1/2 inch diameter, so that this guide could fit into there. And I'll come up from underneath with this through this hole, and this 3/16 part will just project enough to be able to pick up the base and give me a pivot. It also will hold this centerpiece from falling out once I finally cut all the way around. So I've drilled 4 holes in here where I can put these 2-inch screws. 2 of them are outside of the hole, the disc, you know, that's going to fall out, and 2 of them are inside the disc. I'll screw that in from underneath, so this will be pointing, just sticking up out of the table, and then I'll go ahead and route. Okay, there's one last thing I have to do for my installation, and you recall I said there's a little rubber keeper thing that screws into this hole to prevent this whole apparatus from rotating. So I have to route out a little notch for that thing to fit in. So I've gone ahead and put down a couple pieces of tape. This one protects the surface of the, from chipping out. This is how far I push the router mark, and it's 1/4 inch. So I'm just gonna gingerly push this in 1/4 inch and make that little cutout. Okay, that's it. Show you how this works. I've got that little rubber bumper thing there, which you can screw that down, screw the nut down and compress that bumper and make it fit nice and snugly in that little slot. And so basically I just go like this and line up my little bumper, and there we are. I can put the router in from underneath, or I can put the router in ahead of time and drop it down as well. There is an option in the instructions, if you got a router with big handles on it, where you can cut a little slot on each side here and actually tilt this thing and lower it down from the bottom, but I don't need to do that. This is an MDF table, so I'm going to later on put some varnish on there to stiffen up the MDF and prevent, any absorption of moisture which may cause a dimensional change. So that's for another day. But fits in there pretty easily. And I'll normally just leave it like that and work the table saw, and when I need to use the router table, I'll come ahead and just use it. There's also another option if you want to have one of these pins that you use for starting freehand. If you've got a bit in here that has a bearing on it, you may do some freehand routing of an odd-shaped piece, in which case it's easier to start with the work resting on this little pin. So all you do is just drill a 1/4 inch hole here, stick that pin in, and I'll show you that pin. It's the one we've been using for all the alignments. It would just stick in there, and that would be your starting point. I just don't do freehand routing like that, so I just didn't bother to drill the hole. But one thing I did do was I put a little auxiliary fence on my saw stop fence. And what that does, it allows me to capture that bit, and it gives me a resting piece. Usually I'm doing straight work, so I can just run it down the fence, and the bit is, pretty well shielded here. And because this sticks out 1.5 inches, this is 2x4 material, I don't have to worry about dinging my nice saw stop fence. So that's it. Pretty easy installation. If you're not doing a video, it probably takes about an hour, hour and a half to do. For me, it kind of took all day because, I had to make the video and I didn't want to screw this up. But this is a real good, real inexpensive way to have a router table, and it's worked real good for me. So thanks for watching.